Mein Gott, I'll never forget the moment on October 15th, 1943, when I stood in the Radar Operations Center at Dover and watched green dots on an American screen track every single aircraft in my former squadron 70 kilometers away. Their altitude, speed and heading displayed with mathematical precision, while RAF controllers calmly directed interceptor aircraft to positions that would ensure the destruction of men I'd flown with just hours before. The English Channel stretched grey and cold beyond the windows. The smell of electronic equipment mixed with tea and cigarette smoke, and from somewhere in the facility came the sound of Glenn Miller's American Patrol playing on the BBC, a bitter reminder of the technological superiority that had ended my war. I was Oberleutnant Wolfgang Eagle Fischer, Jagdgeschwader 26 Luftwaffe, and after 3 years of fighter combat from the Battle of Britain to the defense of the Reich, I thought I understood everything about aerial warfare, about German technological superiority, about the primitive radar systems that Allied forces were supposedly using to detect German aircraft. My nickname came from my reputation for spotting enemy formations before anyone else in my squadron, and I'd personally shot down 23 Allied aircraft using visual identification techniques that I believed were superior to any electronic detection methods. But what I witnessed during that October afternoon in the Radar Operations Center would shatter every assumption I'd held about German technological leadership, about the effectiveness of Allied detection systems, and about the reasons behind the mounting losses that were decimating the Luftwaffe. That American radar screen would teach me that we'd been fighting not just Allied pilots, but Allied technology operating on a level of sophistication that German engineers had never achieved, and that our recent defeats weren't due to enemy numerical superiority, but to systematic technological advantages that made German aircraft visible to Allied controllers long before German pilots could detect Allied interceptors. My journey to that humbling revelation began on October 14, 1943, during what would prove to be my final combat mission, a desperate attempt to intercept American B-17 Flying Fortress formations attacking German aircraft factories in Schweinfurt. Flying my Focke-Wulf 190A5 at the head of the Zeiss JG-26, I was confident that German fighters could inflict decisive losses on Allied bomber formations that were venturing deep into German airspace without adequate escort protection. Achtung Eagle Flight, I radioed to my wingman as we climbed to intercept altitude over the German border. American bombers are approaching from the west, approximately 150 aircraft in close formation. We will attack from above and behind using standard diving tactics to maximize our speed advantages. The tactics we employed had proven effective against previous American bombing raids, allowing German fighters to achieve favorable kill ratios despite being outnumbered by Allied bomber formations. But as we approached the intercept position, something was different about this engagement. American fighter escorts appeared exactly where they needed to be, at precisely the right altitude, with perfect tactical positioning to counter German attack approaches. Achtung! American fighters 12 o'clock high, called my wingman, Lieutenant Hans Müller, as P-51 Mustangs dove from above with energy advantages that should have been impossible given their supposed patrol positions. The American fighters had been waiting for us, positioned perfectly to counter our attack approach, with altitude and speed advantages that could only have been achieved through advance warning of German fighter movements. But how could American controllers have known our intercept route, our attack altitude, our tactical approach? The engagement was brief and decisive. American fighters, guided by mysterious intelligence about German positions and movements, systematically destroyed my squadron through coordinated attacks that utilized superior positioning and tactical awareness. Within 12 minutes, 8 of my 12 aircraft had been shot down, including my own Focke-Wulf 190, which was crippled by P-51 cannon fire that severed my control cables and forced me to bail out over the English Channel. As my parachute carried me toward the cold waters below, I watched American rescue aircraft approach my position with precision that seemed impossible unless they'd been tracking my descent from the moment I left my aircraft. How could Allied forces have anticipated not just my fighter squadron's movements, but individual pilot emergency situations? My rescue by RAF air-sea rescue launches was efficient and professional, but what puzzled me was the detailed knowledge that Allied personnel demonstrated about German fighter operations, aircraft capabilities, and tactical procedures. British interrogators seemed to know more about Luftwaffe operations than some German squadron leaders. "Oberleutnant Fischer," said Squadron Leader James Harrison during my initial debriefing, "we've been tracking your unit's operations for several months. Your squadron's tactical approaches, preferred attack altitudes, and individual aircraft performance characteristics are well documented by our intelligence services." His casual reference to detailed knowledge of German operations suggested intelligence capabilities that exceeded anything I'd experienced in German military service. But I assumed this information came from captured documents, defectors, or aerial reconnaissance rather than from technological systems that could provide real-time intelligence about aircraft movements. My understanding of Allied capabilities began to change on October 15th, when Squadron Leader Harrison offered to show me some of the technology that's been making life difficult for German pilots recently. I expected to see captured German aircraft being analyzed by Allied engineers, or perhaps interrogation techniques used to extract information from captured aircrew. Instead, I was taken to a heavily guarded facility near Dover, where uniformed personnel monitored banks of electronic equipment that I'd never seen before, studying screens that displayed information in ways that seemed more like science fiction than military reality. "Oberleutnant Fischer," Squadron Leader Harrison explained as we entered the operations center, "this is a chain-home radar station, part of the integrated defense system that protects British airspace and guides our interceptor aircraft to incoming threats." The term radar meant nothing to me, though I'd heard references to Allied radio location systems that supposedly could detect aircraft at long distances. German intelligence had dismissed such claims as Allied propaganda designed to disguise the effectiveness of British spy networks and visual observation posts. "What exactly does this equipment do?" I asked, studying the complex arrangement of electronic devices, oscilloscope screens, and plotting tables that occupy the entire facility. "Radio detection and ranging," explained Flight Lieutenant Robert Thompson, the American officer who commanded the technical operation. "We transmit radio waves that bounce off aircraft and return to our receivers, allowing us to determine the exact position, altitude, speed, and heading of any aircraft within our detection range." The concept seemed impossible by German understanding of radio technology. German aircraft used radio for communication and navigation, but the idea that radio waves could detect and track aircraft movements with precision exceeded anything German engineers had developed. "How accurate is this detection?" I asked skeptically. "Can these radio waves really provide precise information about aircraft positions?" Flight Lieutenant Thompson gestured toward the main radar screen, where green dots moved across a map display with mathematical precision. "We can track individual aircraft at ranges exceeding 200 kilometers, determine their altitude within 100 meters, measure their speed within 10 kilometers per hour, and predict their course with enough accuracy to guide interceptor aircraft to intercept positions." 200 kilometers detection range meant Allied radar could track German aircraft taking off from bases deep inside occupied Europe, providing advance warning that allowed British fighters to be positioned optimally for interception. But surely such claims were exaggerated for propaganda purposes. "Would you like to see a demonstration?" Flight Lieutenant Thompson asked with the confidence of someone who understood his equipment's capabilities. The demonstration began at 1400 hours, when operators announced that German aircraft were taking off from airfields in occupied France. On the radar screen, I watched green dots appear and begin moving across the English Channel toward British airspace. Dots that supposedly represented individual German aircraft that were still invisible to human observers. "Those contacts represent a formation of approximately 12 aircraft," explained the radar operator, pointing to clustered green dots on his screen. "Based on their speed and altitude, they appear to be Focke-Wulf 190 fighters conducting a fighter sweep over the channel. 12 Focke-Wulf 190s matched exactly the composition of fighter sweeps typically conducted by German squadrons operating from French bases. But how could Allied radar operators determine aircraft types from electronic signals? "We've learned to identify aircraft characteristics based on radar signatures," Flight Lieutenant Thompson explained. "Different aircraft produce different return patterns, allowing experienced operators to distinguish between fighters, bombers, and other aircraft types." The demonstration continued as RAF controllers used radar information to vector British fighters toward intercept positions with German formations that were still 150 kilometers away from British coastlines. British fighters were being positioned optimally before German pilots could even see their targets. Scramble red section to vector 090, altitude 6,000 meters, ordered the British controller. Bandits bearing 180, range 120 kilometers, altitude 5,500 meters, speed 450 kph. The precision of this information was staggering. Allied controllers knew exactly where German aircraft were located, how high they were flying, how fast they were traveling, and which direction they were heading. Information that allowed British fighters to be guided to perfect intercept positions without any visual contact or radio intercepts. But the true shock came when I realized that the green dots on the radar screen represented aircraft from my former squadron, pilots I'd flown with, friends who didn't know they were being tracked by Allied technology that made their movements visible to enemy controllers in real time. "Mein Gott," I whispered in German. "You can see every German aircraft in the sky." "Not just German aircraft," Flight Lieutenant Thompson replied. "This radar system tracks every aircraft within its range. Allied, German, neutral, commercial. We know the position of every airplane over northwestern Europe at any given moment." The implications were devastating for German air operations. Luftwaffe fighters that depended on surprise attacks, bombers that relied on avoiding Allied interceptors, reconnaissance aircraft that tried to penetrate British airspace undetected, all were visible to Allied radar operators who could guide defending aircraft to perfect intercept positions. As the demonstration continued, I watched British fighters being vectored toward my former squadron with precision that eliminated any element of surprise or tactical advantage that German pilots might have possessed. The green dots representing German aircraft moved steadily toward Britain, while green dots representing British fighters moved to intercept positions that would ensure German destruction. "Contact. Red section has visual contact with bandits," reported the British squadron leader over radio communications that were being monitored by the radar station. 12 Focke-Wulf 190s at 5,500 meters, attacking now. On the radar screen, I watched green dots representing German and British aircraft merge into confused clusters as aerial combat began. But the British fighters had been guided to perfect attacking positions by radar information that gave them every tactical advantage: altitude, positioning, energy state, and numerical concentration at the point of contact. Within minutes, several German contacts disappeared from the radar screen, indicating aircraft that had been shot down or damaged beyond operational capability. The surviving German aircraft turned toward France, pursued by British fighters that continued to be guided by radar controllers who could track every movement of the retreating formation. "How long have you been using this technology against German aircraft?" I asked, beginning to understand the systematic nature of recent Luftwaffe losses. "Chain home radar has been operational since 1938, Flight Lieutenant Thompson replied. "We've been tracking German aircraft movements since the beginning of the war, continuously improving our equipment and procedures based on operational experience. Since 1938, for 5 years, Allied radar had been providing British controllers with complete intelligence about German aircraft movements, allowing systematic interception of German formations that had no idea they were being tracked by electronic systems operating beyond visual range. This explained the mystery of perfectly positioned British fighters, the uncanny ability of Allied interceptors to appear exactly where German formations were most vulnerable, the systematic destruction of German aircraft that had seemed impossible based on traditional aerial warfare mathematics. "But surely German engineers have developed similar radar technology," I said, unwilling to accept that Germany had been so completely outclassed in such crucial technology. "German radar development has focused primarily on anti-aircraft gun direction," Flight Lieutenant Thompson explained, with professional courtesy that somehow made his words more devastating. "Your Würzburg radar systems are quite effective for guiding flak batteries, but they lack the range, precision, and integration necessary for strategic air defense." He was describing technological inferiority that went beyond individual equipment to systematic approaches to radar development and deployment. German radar was tactical equipment for specific weapon systems, while Allied radar was strategic technology integrated into comprehensive air defense networks. "This radar system," he continued, is connected to similar stations across Britain, creating overlapping coverage that eliminates blind spots and provides redundant tracking of all aircraft movements. Information is transmitted instantaneously to central plotting rooms where controllers coordinate responses across multiple sectors and aircraft types. The systematic integration he described exceeded anything in German military experience. German air defense relied on individual units operating independently with limited coordination, while Allied air defense operated as integrated systems that maximized efficiency of available resources. As the demonstration continued, I observed radar tracking of German reconnaissance aircraft attempting to photograph British installations, German fighter bombers conducting nuisance raids against coastal targets, and German transport aircraft crossing occupied Europe on logistical missions. Every German aircraft movement was visible to Allied radar operators, who could alert appropriate defensive forces or ignore flights that posed no immediate threats. "Do you track German aircraft over Germany itself?" I asked, wondering about the geographic range of Allied radar capabilities. "Our current radar systems provide coverage to approximately 200 kilometers from British coastlines," Flight Lieutenant Thompson replied. "But we're developing longer-range systems and deploying radar equipment with Allied ground forces as they advance into occupied territory." Radar equipment advancing with Allied ground forces meant German aircraft would face systematic tracking even over their own airfields, eliminating any sanctuary where German pilots could operate without electronic surveillance. But perhaps most significantly, I learned that radar information was being integrated with other intelligence sources to provide comprehensive understanding of German air capabilities, operational patterns, and strategic intentions that exceeded German commanders' knowledge of their own forces. "Radar tracking," explained Squadron Leader Harrison, "provides real-time intelligence about German aircraft movements that we combine with communications intercepts, photo reconnaissance, and agent reports to develop complete pictures of Luftwaffe operations." This intelligence integration created systematic advantages that went beyond technological superiority to strategic understanding that allowed Allied planners to anticipate German operations and position resources for maximum effectiveness. "For example," Squadron Leader Harrison continued, "we know that your former squadron typically launches fighter sweeps between 1300 and 1500 hours, prefers attack altitudes between 5,000 and 6,000 meters, and uses specific radio frequencies for tactical coordination. This knowledge allows us to position interceptors optimally and jam your communications during critical combat phases." Such detailed knowledge of German tactical procedures could only come from systematic observation and analysis conducted over extended periods using technological capabilities that German intelligence lacked. As my day at the radar station concluded, I realized that German aircrew had been fighting not just Allied pilots and aircraft, but integrated technological systems that provided systematic advantages in detection, tracking, coordination, and tactical positioning that made German defeat inevitable, regardless of individual pilot skill or aircraft performance. "Oberleutnant Fischer," Squadron Leader Harrison said as he prepared to return me to prisoner facilities, "German pilots are skilled and courageous aviators who deserve respect from any professional airman. But individual excellence cannot overcome systematic technological disadvantages that make every German aircraft visible to Allied controllers, while Allied aircraft remain invisible to German detection systems." His assessment was accurate and devastating. German pilot training, aircraft performance, and tactical doctrine were being neutralized by Allied technology that operated beyond German capabilities to detect, counter, or comprehend. During my subsequent interrogations, British intelligence officers demonstrated detailed knowledge of German aircraft, airfields, personnel, and operations that could only have been obtained through systematic intelligence collection using technological methods superior to anything in German experience. "We know the names of pilots in your squadron," one interrogator told me casually, "their individual aircraft preferences, their tactical specialties, even their personal relationships and family backgrounds. This information comes from multiple sources, including radar tracking of individual aircraft, communications intercepts, and photographic analysis of airfield activities." Such comprehensive intelligence about German operations provided Allied planners with advantages that exceeded anything German intelligence had achieved about Allied forces. German pilots were fighting enemies who knew more about German capabilities than German commanders knew about Allied resources. My time as a prisoner of war included conversations with other captured German aircrew who'd experienced similar encounters with Allied technological superiority. Their stories revealed the systematic nature of German technological disadvantages across multiple aircraft types and operational theaters. The Americans have radar systems on their bombers, reported Hauptmann Kurt Weber, a night fighter pilot who'd been captured during unsuccessful intercepts of Allied bombing formations. They can detect German fighters approaching from any direction and direct defensive fire with precision that makes surprise attacks impossible. British coastal radar tracks German aircraft from the moment they take off, added Oberleutnant Hans Müller, a reconnaissance pilot who'd been shot down during intelligence missions over British installations. They know exactly where we're going, when we'll arrive, and which route we'll use for return flights. These accounts confirmed that radar technology provided Allied forces with systematic advantages across all aspects of aerial warfare, from strategic bombing defense to tactical fighter operations to intelligence collection missions. But perhaps most significantly, captured German aircrew reported that Allied technological superiority was expanding rapidly through continuous development and deployment of improved radar systems, while German countermeasures remained limited to tactical modifications that couldn't address fundamental technological disadvantages. German radio intelligence, explained Major Friedrich Brenner, a signals officer who'd been captured during ground operations, can intercept Allied communications and occasionally jam radar transmissions, but we lack the technological base necessary for developing competitive radar systems or effective countermeasures against Allied electronic warfare capabilities. This technological gap meant German forces would face increasingly sophisticated Allied detection and tracking systems while possessing limited capabilities for neutralizing or avoiding electronic surveillance. When I was repatriated to Germany in 1947, I found a country devastated by war, but also presented with opportunities for technological reconstruction using knowledge gained from Allied systems observed during captivity. German radar development, I reported to aviation industry officials, lagged behind Allied achievements by several years in most technical categories. Future German electronic systems must incorporate systematic approaches to integration and coordination that characterized Allied radar networks. This recognition influenced post-war German technological development as engineers worked to understand and adapt Allied electronic warfare techniques while developing new approaches that could compete with continued Allied innovation. The radar systems that tracked German aircraft, I explained to post-war aviation developers, succeeded not just because of individual technological superiority, but because of systematic integration with other intelligence sources, defensive systems, and operational coordination that maximized effectiveness of available resources. These systematic approaches became models for German technological development during Reconstruction, emphasizing integration and coordination over individual technical excellence as the foundation for competitive capabilities. My correspondence with British and American radar operators continued throughout the 1950s and 1960s, providing insights into continued technological development and opportunities for German participation in international defense cooperation. Wolfgang, wrote Flight Lieutenant Thompson, now a civilian electronics engineer, radar technology continues to evolve rapidly with applications extending beyond military uses to civilian aviation, weather forecasting, and scientific research. German technical expertise could contribute significantly to international cooperation in electronic systems development. These opportunities allowed German engineers to participate in technological advancement while building relationships with former enemies who'd become partners in addressing shared challenges that required international cooperation. In 1963, 20 years after my encounter with Allied radar technology, I was invited to visit the United States as part of technological exchange programs designed to share electronic warfare knowledge among NATO allies. The visit provided opportunities to observe radar development that had progressed far beyond World War II capabilities, creating systems that could track artificial satellites, guide intercontinental missiles, and provide early warning of strategic threats across global distances. "Colonel Fisher," said General Patterson, formerly Flight Lieutenant Thompson, "the radar principles you observed in 1943 have evolved into integrated defense networks that protect North America and Europe while providing technological foundations for space exploration and commercial aviation. These developments demonstrated that wartime technological advantages had been applied constructively for peaceful purposes while creating capabilities that could address threats requiring international cooperation rather than national competition." "The radar screen that showed you every Luftwaffe aircraft in 1943, General Patterson explained, now tracks spacecraft, monitors weather patterns, and guides civilian aircraft safely through crowded airspace around the world." This transformation of military technology for civilian applications provided hope that former enemies could collaborate in developing technological capabilities that served human progress rather than national competition. My final assessment of Allied radar technology, written in 1975 shortly before my retirement, acknowledged both the technological achievement and its implications for international relations. The radar systems that made every German aircraft visible to Allied controllers in 1943 represented not just technical superiority, but systematic approaches to technology integration that could serve peaceful purposes when applied constructively rather than competitively. This was my story, Oberleutnant Wolfgang Eagle Fischer, who learned that German technological leadership was an illusion, that Allied electronic systems operated on levels of sophistication that German engineers had never achieved, and that systematic technological integration could provide advantages more decisive than individual technical excellence. My encounter with Allied radar taught me that what I dismissed as enemy propaganda was actually conservative description of technological capabilities that exceeded German imagination, that modern warfare was being decided by electronic systems operating beyond visual range, and that former enemies could become partners when they recognized each other's technological contributions to human advancement. What struck you most about my discovery of Allied radar capabilities that could track every German aircraft? Have you heard similar accounts from veterans who were amazed by the technological advantages that determined victory in World War II? These personal testimonies help us understand how technological superiority could be as decisive as numerical or tactical advantages. If you want to hear more first-hand accounts like this one, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Tomorrow we'll be sharing the story of Capitaine Pierre Lafayette Dubois, a French resistance fighter who witnessed how American electronic intelligence capabilities helped coordinate Allied operations across occupied Europe. These voices from the past deserve to be heard. Let's make sure their stories live on.